Hello, Jibos, and today we're going to be talking about a paper called Atoms and Void, which is going to be about Democritus, and this was inspired by a recent conversation with Tim Adalin, Alexander Ebert, and Cadell last on the philosophy of lack 2. If you haven't had a chance to see it, do check it out on Cadell's channel. And you know, it always amazes me with Democritus. You know, he's a pre-Socratic thinker who predicted the existence of atoms, that there was other planets than Earth, that there might even be multiple dimensions. But unfortunately, all we have left of him is fragments. We don't really have any of his completed works. And I sometimes wonder if we would refer to Socrates as a post-Democritus thinker had the works of Democritus lasted, because it was just so brilliant. And he had this really interesting idea that the whole world was made of atoms and void. And critically, void is not actually nothing, as in nothingness. Void is the necessary precondition for atoms to move around. It's more like space, I suppose. If there is no space, atoms can't move, and they can't therefore hook together and create matter, following the structure of Democritus. So for him, it really doesn't make much sense to talk about void as being nothing. It's more like a not thing, but it's the condition that makes things possible. In this way, atoms and void have an indivisible relationship. They need one another. Well, I'm not necessarily going to sit here and tell you that the science of Democritus is true, but that idea right there, that atoms or being requires nothing in order to move and be itself, I think is extremely useful. If we take it seriously, it would mean that we need nothing, that we need space and void in order to exist and to move. Alex Ebert had that great part in the talk where he says, if you want to be, what is infinity? What is full satisfaction? Infinity is that which needs nothing, it therefore needs nothing. And it's a very nice idea right there. But you see, we always kind of other nothing. We think of nothing as something, it doesn't have value. We think of it as not being there. It's not worth thinking about. There's this othering of nothing we engage in. And what I mean when I say that we possibly need nothing to move? Well, if you literally had everything, if you had all the money, if you had all the love, all the relationships, everything in the world, what would motivate you? What would get you out of bed in the morning? What would keep you going? It's precisely that there are some things we don't have that make us active, that give us even hope to achieve different things, that the absence of something can be a motivating principle. It's also worth noting that people, Walker Percy had this essay where he asked this question, it's like, why is the highest depression rates in the richest parts of America? Why is it that people get excited when there's a hurricane coming? And this sounds very nihilistic, but it might just suggest that we need to integrate ourselves with nothing, learn to live with it, to learn to live with lack, as opposed to denying it, running away, pretending it's not there. And it should be noticed that it kind of almost seems like Democritus, in suggesting that everything is atoms and void, is a nihilistic thinker. But he was also kind of thought of as the cheerful philosopher, who's very cheerful. And similarly, Kafka is often taken as being very nihilistic, but apparently Deleuze talks about this, Walker Percy talks about this. Whenever Kafka would do readings of his stories, everyone would laugh, and he would laugh until tears rolled down his eyes. So it's a very different image than we tend to get of Kafka being this miserable, self-destructive, or depressed individual would be the better term. In fact, there might be something about accepting nothing or lack that helps us actually live a more fulfilling and better life. But we're not even going to consider that thought if all we do is focus on being, if all we focus on the atoms, on something, and just consider nothing as background, as behind us, as not really mattering. If we think that what's nothing is valueless, irrational, and also powerless, like if it's nothing, then it can't do anything to us, then we're going to dismiss it and we're not going to take it seriously. We're certainly not going to think of it as the possibility space of the material. Also, our language of nothing is always ex nihilo, creation ex nihilo. We get out of nothing, we escape nothing. We escape nothing. There's no language of being indebted to nothing. And I always find that interesting, because if the universe is really surrounded by nothing, then there's a real sense that the universe is inside nothing, that indeed the reason the universe can move and expand is thanks to something like nothing. But instead, all of our thinking about nothing is othering and escaping from it, which of course has consequences, because if we think of nothing as something to escape or something out of place, then when we feel a lack in our lives, when we feel that we're missing something, when we feel something like nothing, we're going to assume that the name of the game is to escape it, to get rid of it, as opposed to learn to live with it. And if it's not possible to live without nothing because we become motionless per se, because we can't move, then our thinking about nothing has very practical consequences, because instead of learning to live with it, we're going to always be trying to escape it, and we'll never succeed, and that could be very problematic. In Christianity, there's this idea that you can never escape sin. You're always going to be a sinner, even the saint, and that instead the name of the game is learning to live with that reality and manage it as opposed to solve it. And here with Democritus, we have a way of thinking about it, to not think of nothing as always being out of place, as something to fill, but ultimately something that we need in order to move around. It should also be noted in Democritus, you could almost say that atoms are, they are in nothing, they're in the void, and yet still without the void, because it's not compositionally made of the void. Is this interesting distinction between in and inside that the paper will get into? Like, for example, atoms move in the void, but they're not in. But there's no void inside of atoms, and similarly, there's no atoms inside of void. That you have these two necessarily dependent entities on one another that don't compositionally make one another in any way. But this is very strange, because of all we tend to conflate in and inside in our thinking. And if in fact there's some scientific truth, metaphoric, maybe even metaphysical truth to Democritus, then ultimately a theory of everything, a single theory of everything, is impossible, because the best you can do maybe is two theories of everything, a theory of everything with a hyphen between the every and thing, and a theory of void, or a theory of nothing, and that you'd have these two entities these two theories that would have to learn to dialectically get along, exist together. But if our thinking is nothing is totally other, then all of our thinking is in favor of a thinking of everything. There's no thinking of two, no possibility of a theory of two. Not in our personal lives, not in our science, not in science, not in our metaphysics, in nothing. So if we take Democritus seriously, it may open up some creative possibilities that may lend themselves into the thinking of Hegel, but that would be another conversation for another time. So anyway, this was Atoms and Void by O.G. Rose. Please check out Facebook, the website, ogrose.com, Instagram, and please also listen to the Philosophy of Lack 2, which you can find on Cadell's YouTube page. And thank you for your time.